and good day to you. My name is Pratik Desai, Senior Product Marketing Manager for the public sector at HERE Technologies. Welcome to our third installment of the Art of Location webinar series. Today, we'll be discussing public safety disaster preparedness specifically for large disasters. I'm joined today by an esteemed panel of public safety experts. First, we have Rob Martin. Rob is the CEO and president of Suntech International USA, a telematics expert firm, and he's the former executive director of the National Emergency Number Association, also known as the 911 Association. He also worked for the National Academies of Emergency Dispatch, the certifying body for 911 dispatchers, and worked as a public safety lobbyist. Rob is currently based in San Diego. Next, we have joining us Todd Stout. Todd is the founder and president of FirstWatch, a specialty data and analytics provider for public safety. Todd is a former EMS and is based out of San Diego, California. Following Todd, we have Mike Taigman. Mike Taigman is the improvement guide at FirstWatch. Mike has been working in emergency services for over 46 years. He's led large paramedic systems, teaches at the University of California, San Francisco, and University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Currently lives in Santa Barbara, California, and serves as improvement guide. Last but not least, we have Chris Call. Chris is the co-founder and CMO of Pulsara. Pulsara is a firm that specializes in mobile communications platforms for public safety agencies. He joins us with over 27 years of public safety experience, as well as experience as a critical care flight paramedic. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Good to see you.
Much.
Folks, we're going to talk about emergency preparedness from the perspective of agencies that need to respond to large disasters. We have a number of them going on in our world today, everything from the California wildfires to the hurricanes in the southeast of the United States, and certainly the global and national efforts around the epidemiological response surrounding COVID-19. So we will frame our answers from the perspective of what's going on in today's world. My first question is to Rob. Rob, what are the top needs for large public safety agencies, including state and local, but also federal, and how do they differ from the smaller agencies?
Right, if you're looking at disaster response, the top need is going to be where is help needed? In any particular situation, I have to say the top three needs are going to be location, and then location, and perhaps location. As to coin an old phrase, if we can't find you, we can't help you. I go back to my early days working with the academies and dispatch training, and the 911 dispatcher was specifically asked to say, where is the emergency? We need to be able to know how to get help. It's more important than anything else. And especially with the large scale national disasters, I'd say the difference between large and small is really just that scale, is what resources are necessary. But the answer is the same. You need to know where help is necessary and to send those resources. So the next needs, I'd say, are the people that are going to go in and assist, and the things that are necessary to facilitate that response. So there's your top five. And how that scales is the game that's played. And it's really interesting. I'd say currently I'm in the business of selling little sensor devices to find location, but it's one of the things that I've really appreciated from my background in public safety is the importance of knowing where things are. That's got to be the top response. And as we go throughout the webinar, we'll talk a little more, I know, about the people, the staffing, and the things that are necessary. We're really challenged, especially in this post-COVID era, or whatever we're calling these uncertain times. It's challenging to find people that are willing to take the risks to go into uncertain situations, and it's becoming more challenging every day. These people are putting their own lives and at risk to be able to do those kind of responses. So it's a very significant thing.
Thank you for that. You made a remark that I thought was quite interesting and quite compelling, frankly. It's this notion that scale is the single differentiator between large and small disasters. What that necessarily would imply is that for larger agencies at the national and international level, they really behave as a force multiplier. What are one or two examples in which they come in and help out these smaller agencies when it comes to these larger disasters?
Right. The collaboration between agencies and the time of a scalable force multiplier example, as you said, is really what's vital. So most of the disaster or most of the emergency response is going to be local, and they understand that particular area. But when there's a significant, larger scale disaster, they're going to have their own demand management plans to scale down what's the non-priority and to prioritize up the immediate situation that's necessary. And with that, they'll have mutual aid agreements to where they'll know who to call in. And in some cases, that goes all the way up to FEMA or federal resources, if not multi-state, depending on the scale of the disaster. And that can include the hurricanes or the flooding across Texas. It spans a large area, and you have people in many different situations that are going to overwhelm just the one local resource to be able to respond by themselves.
So your local responders are the experts on and location technologies there to kind of amplify their efforts. So are the federal agencies the ones coming in with some of the more cutting edge technologies, scenario planning, 3D mapping, drones, possibly even more resources?
I mean, if you're looking at being able to map the fire, a small fire in a house is one thing. When you have a bushfire that's growing, that this is a foreseen circumstance, we're going to go after that. When you end up with multiple fires over many acres, this requires extra help, and there's plans already in place to do that. But not every local agency has a fleet of drones that they can, that have the infrared cameras that can fly over and map the area, and they can see which roads are blocked and where assistance is needed. So there's a lot of technology. Technology is never the problem, and money is not the problem. It's the allocation of that. It requires good leadership and good management, and that's where you need to plan ahead. And I think it's an area that requires some public-private partnerships in a way to be able to bring the resources together to respond to each specific situation more effectively than to just leave it to the local group alone.
Thank you. That was really powerful. I want to pull the thread on that last remark. It seems that you're getting at emergency response times, and I want to dive into that topic a little bit further. Todd, I'd like to ask you, why is it that the collective universe of public safety continues to study and evaluate faster emergency response times? What's underneath there that we should be considering as we talk to public safety agencies?
It's a good question, and I think that it's actually for a few reasons. One of which is just that it's very easy to evaluate during and after the fact. It's a very objective set of numbers, and there's not a lot in our world that we can objectively evaluate, especially in a disaster situation. So there's a pull to do things that are easy first as you go through it. I think within the EMS world that I spend a lot of my time in, and fire and law enforcement have different aspects of that, but there are only a small percentage of calls that we respond to that actually have the clinical need for very quick response times, and those are important. For a disaster, I think the response time is very important because the sooner we get someone there to assess the situation, the scope, the number and type of resources needed. Obviously, then the follow-on resources can get there sooner and have the right resources, the right places, the right time. But I think the third part of that is that there's an emotional component to response times. And while it may not clinically matter if we have a 20 or 30 or even 45-minute response time to your kindergartner who's fallen off their bike and has an open fracture and is in a lot of pain, it may not matter if your mom or your grandma has fallen and hurt herself and is laying in the floor, in pain, maybe has been there for hours, and is soiled. But emotionally, you want help right away. And so I think that's why this just keeps coming up and keeps coming up. And the other challenge with it is that to have fast response times to lots and lots, or even hopefully most of your calls, requires a huge amount of preparedness and a huge amount of expense associated with it. And so in these days, when there's not a lot of money available to handle the responsiveness and the preparedness, you have to decide. And we choose and make triage decisions every day in public safety, and that's a normal thing of what we do. But being able to do that in a way that is, the right people, the right places, the right times is what's important. And, part of my perspective is it's a thing we can keep track of. Let's not screw up anything we don't have to.
Todd, that's really compelling. I mean, you're basically saying, yes, emergency response times matter, but you're offering a reconciliation saying it matters more for certain incident types, for the broader body of work, that ultimate preparedness is the most important thing. And that really is what facilitates your response times in any incident type. So my next question is really about building a culture of preparedness. Chris, how do you build a culture of preparedness at a public safety agency, either large or small?
Yeah, Pratik, that's a great question. I think that you guys are talking about the right things. There's certain times, right, as Todd said, where we have time-sensitive emergencies and time matters. Faster matters. Heart attacks, strokes, STEMIs, the small house fire, but it's isolated to one room, so on and so forth. And so while faster may be true, just like Todd said, it's more important to focus on the right response with the right resources at the right time. And that speaks to what Rob was saying about scaling and getting the right individuals there when they need with the right tools. And I like what you used the word culture when you said, how do you build a culture of preparedness? And we really have two choices, to be reactive to events that happen or to be proactive. And so I think when you're talking about preparedness, it's how do you create a culture of being proactive? And I look at it and say, we need to plan, we need to practice, and then we can execute the same way every time. And if we're doing the basics consistently, then we have the opportunity then to have the bandwidth to adapt to whatever the changing environment is. And I look at that the similar ways that what I call and what I've coined as the dance principle. And if you look at a Broadway play, there's so many players in that. You clearly have your actors and their singers and dancers and the performers, but you also have lights and sound, and you have the stage crew, and you have costumes, and you have musicians, and you have, as we're conducting this entire program, it's based on, right, that they've planned what they're going to do. They have experience and training on it. They practice it. And so when it comes to the day of the event, it's not something new. They're executing on what they become experts at. And we need to take that same concept and apply it to public safety. And so instead of saying, let's train quarterly or once a month or maybe only once a year on national disasters or big scale events, right? And when we say a disaster, I think we should define that as anything that overwhelms our resources, okay? And so instead of just training for a disaster once a year, twice a year maybe, we should be using the same tools every single time. And then when a disaster happens, all we're doing is scaling on those tools. Instead of taking a product off the shelf and dusting it off when things are overwhelming us, human nature says we actually scale back to the tools that we've been doing every day, and we focus and connect to that. So culture of change. A colleague of mine, Dale Pearson, said, we should focus on doing the common things uncommonly well. And we need to make a culture where our tools that we use are scalable.
That's really compelling. And a reminder to our audience, if you guys have any questions, feel free to use the questions or the chat box on the bottom right side. We'll continue to engage with them. We also have collected some of kind of the gems of wisdom from our panelists in the form of an artifact or a takeaway document. You have the opportunity to download that as well as a PDF. Chris, your remark is extremely compelling. The fact that public safety agencies, before they even invest in things like location technology, it's about investing in the muscles that you would use during your utilization of location technology, like training or like scenario planning, I think is quite powerful. And I want to dive into that topic a little bit further as well. So Mike, Chris was talking about agencies need to, before they get tech savvy, get activity savvy, essentially. He's saying they need to conduct more training exercises. we have this new burgeoning field that location technology supports called scenario planning. And I want to understand from your perspective, both as a former emergency responder and as an expert at a data and analytics company for public safety, why is scenario planning one of the areas that's most ripe for innovation?
You know, when you think about it, basically all the training we do in emergency services has its roots in scenario planning. When as a paramedic, I was learning how to take care of somebody with a heart attack or a gunshot wound, I was imagining the scenario that I would be walking into to do my assessment and do my treatment, and growing that mental model to the size of disasters just makes really good logical sense. And Shell Oil was probably one of the organizations that really pioneered scenario planning, and they would, at their strategic planning retreats, every year imagine the most, kind of horrific, kind of crazy situation that they could possibly think of in great detail, and then kind of walk through how they would really actually respond. And a number of folks here have talked about, kind of the need for things to kind of already exist and be spread out. And as I was listening to it, I was reflecting that the utility model of electricity and internet is what allows us to have this conversation. All of us have power to our homes or places of work, depending on where we're sitting from. We've all got internet access, and we rely on that to be available for this conversation. And we need to have that available to us. The electricity needs to be available to us if I want to turn on my lights, even if I don't turn on my lights for a couple of years. And the same kind of thinking is true in disaster planning and scenario planning, is to realize you got to have your infrastructure kind of already there. And then the more comfortable you are already using it, the better things are going to be. So if you, for instance, as an emergency medical services system, if you use the disaster framework for managing, 4 or 5 patient car crashes, and you do that every time so that you're doing it daily and daily and daily, so everybody's using their training rather than just in one big once a year scenario, they're using it as part of how they manage stuff, where your dispatchers are, identifying a scene commander, they're talking about ingress and egress routes, there's somebody who's managing transportation, and you think about it and do things from that perspective all the time. Then, when it comes to be a plane crash or a major fire through an area or mudslides or whatever, people are already used to those phrases, that way of thinking and those systems. So that it just makes the effectiveness of being able to manage the disaster that much better as far as people's knowledge and behavior along with the systems they're paired with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. You're really talking about scenario planning is so ripe for innovation because that's an area where we can quickly get some mileage. There is this notion of it's real, it's tangible, like say if there's a blackout or if there's a flood, and also to the extent that you can breed familiarity with what are the commensurate activities you want to perform when one of these things happens, you can parlay that into your technology. At that point, it's a smooth ramp. Todd, what do you think?
You're on mute, Todd.
Got you on mute, Todd.
Darn it. One other factor about the scenario planning that I think is really important to keep in mind is we're humans that are responding to these disasters. And to Mike's point, if we use those steps, techniques, tools, approaches on a daily or weekly basis, they become ingrained into our system, into our way of thinking. And so when we are actually in a disaster, when our adrenaline's pumping, maybe we're worried about our family at home while we're on duty, all of those things are going on, then the more things that you don't have to think through to do, you can fall back upon essentially your muscle memory. And it's even more than muscle memory because it's just how you function as you go through that. And, we're not immune to the stress and the emotion and the adrenaline and the fear and the anxiety. We just hopefully work through it. And part of the way of working through it is to have these things built in so you can focus on the things that your minimized focus and brain are able to in that moment.
Chris.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Todd's saying. And there's these silos, right? We built these silos of this is how I do it in EMS. This is how I do it in the emergency department. Here's how I do it in the cath lab. And a very finite focused example about simulation is the simulation of motion in Montana, where they have these vehicles, 3 vehicles spread out across the state. And in the back looks like and is a full ambulance. And then in the middle is the control center, and in the front looks like and is set up identical to emergency department. And they're going out to these communities and saying, let's work on a cardiac arrest scenario. And just like that, how we practice, how we are going to actually perform later, everybody has a role, and they walk through and they provide their care for this patient. And in the back in the simulation area, and we've all taken a CPR class, and you have the quadruple amputee mannequin, and it's static, and you put your fingers up, and then you look at the instructor, so the instructor can tell you whether or not they have a pulse, right? But that's not real life. There is no instructor on a real patient. So in these scenarios, they're high fidelity simulators where they can cry and they can talk and they can react. And if I don't feel a pulse, I can go to Rob, I don't think I feel a pulse. Can you try? Do you feel a pulse? And it becomes a real scenario. And as they move, they're breaking down these silos between the different organizations as they're handing off that transition of care. It's just an example of simulation and how they're breaking down all these areas so that they're actually practicing how they're going to perform later on.
What do you think, Mike?
I was just going to spin back to what Todd was mentioning about the kind of the muscle memory and the impact on local folks, and kind of tie that in with the national and the large disaster response, is to remember, like, with these wildfires in Northern California, I've got a lot of friends who are paramedics, police officers, and firefighters who are responding while their own homes are burning down, while their own families are being relocated. So, one of the things to think about is, it's like, I've still got a job to do. I'm going to go, try to save lives, and I'm worried about myself and my own kind of stability. So being able to have the skills to manage the disaster, manage the emotional and psychological stress and response. And one of the huge gifts that the larger national organizations can bring in is they can bring in relief so that people can go take care of themselves and their families and get some breaks to be able to attend to those things that really complicate the local disaster response.
Well, guys, this is some really compelling stuff. I mean, the notion of breaking down silos makes sense intuitively, and the fact that they still continue to exist and that's an area of opportunity for public safety agencies is enormous. I mean, I think we can all agree common platforms is great, interoperable platforms and tools are great, but also I think, Chris, you were kind of briefly alluding to this. Can I develop a schema or a framework that my peer agencies can use? Or if I have a tool or a set of tools, say based on location technology, that I use for scenario planning, can my sister agency use the same exact thing? And by the way, we already got a force of trained responders that can help facilitate and maybe even conduct joint exercises together. I see a lot of opportunity here. And the question I've got back to the group, especially Mike, is what advice would you have for, say, the larger national federal agencies or even the international agencies that might work with, say, a handful of these smaller local agencies when they're, say, trying to set up a framework for here's how we respond to large disasters in this region or in that region?
It's an interesting issue, because having been through those circumstances when the help arrives, one of the things that I've noticed a lot is that sometimes locals kind of bristle at the big folks coming in, right? And so from the large national organization level, build your relationships with the people you might be helping now, so that it's Todd and Rob and Chris coming in, not XYZ 3-letter government agency, right? And the other thing is to come in and first realize that you're coming in as a backup to a whole bunch of folks who have responded and handled things as best they could with the stuff they already had, who are exhausted and still trying to think about kind of next level and next issue. So coming in and first pausing to listen. And that just, you're not talking days or weeks, we're talking minutes, but pause to listen and then ask that question, how can we help? Even if you've got a bunch of stuff that you know will just take care of things, pausing and asking that question, how can we be of most help to you? And which kind of allows them to relax and not go, oh, these people are here to take me over and I'm no longer relevant. And just, keep them close and included in the decision making, because at some point in time the disaster is going to be over and you're going to go home and they're still going to be there to recover it. So they need some standing in their community. They need to be part of the PR process. They need to be part of who's on cameras. They need to be part of all of that in order for you to manage the disaster well and recover from it well on the other side.
That's incredible advice, Mike. And I think you just talked about one of the biggest obstacles that public safety agencies face, which is, ownership and handoff. There shouldn't be necessarily a battle of ownership. It should be a collaborative effort and a smoother handoff. Rob, what are some other obstacles that public safety agencies may face, say at the state and local level in collaboration with the larger agencies? And maybe what are some examples? And if you could talk about a way to overcome it as well, I think that would be really compelling for our audience.
Sure. As the one person on this panel that's not physically been an emergency responder, I've always been the guy in the back room with working with the people in the association or the business matters. What I did for the last few weeks when I was asked to first be on this webinar was reach out to people I've worked with throughout my career who are involved in these front lines at large scale agencies, local, state like CAL FIRE, and also East Coast folks that are working in emergency services from police, fire, and EMS agencies. It's really amazing the consistency of the responses that they gave me when I asked them in advance, hey, I'm going to be on a panel and ask questions about what you need. If you were in my shoes, what would you say? And it kind of goes back to, the points I brought up initially, location, 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 then these people and things that are just the resources coming in. I really have to emphasize the number one thing, and it's all been talked about already, is the human factor involved, and recognizing these responders are as professionals, certifying them, paying them, recognizing the stress they're under, and we've mentioned large scale agencies having extra resources. It's one thing to train and practice. When a situation that is a disaster occurs and you're out there on the front line responding to it, it is a critical incident, and different people will manage that differently. And having resources for mental health for the people that are on the front lines is really important. One fact that was given to me is over the last 4 years consistently, officer suicides have outpaced line of duty deaths, and it's getting worse. And you see people unwilling or taking leaves of absence until COVID is over, not willing to put themselves anymore in that front line, especially in areas of civil unrest. Personal experience, my brother's been a police officer in Utah the last 26 years and just chose to take retirement. I think he's not alone in that situation. We really face a human crisis right now towards emergency response. So being able to address that both at the state, local, and national level is going to be really vital.
No, thank you for that. I think that's a really powerful answer and a reminder that, as we talk about best practices, schema, frameworks, or even tools, say location technology, it doesn't matter whether you can visualize the world in 3D or, develop an algorithm to help EMS get somewhere faster. There is a human element to it, and our heroes deserve that support. So thank you for calling that out. I think that's very important to mention. Looking into that, as we look at collaborating and diving into that human element a little bit further, I think you were briefly alluding to this notion of preparedness to minimize risk exposure. And I think that's a really interesting topic. And Chris, I'd like to pose that one to you. You've got a wealth of experience in public safety. I think this panel collectively has a century plus in emergency services and public safety. How can technology, or specifically location technology, help to reduce risk exposure, taking into consideration that human element?
Well, yeah, can technology help reduce risk exposure? And I liked what Rob said earlier, right when we first opened up. He said, technology isn't the problem, and yet technology also isn't the solution. It's a tool. And we commonly say around the offices of Pulsara that our technology solution, or anybody's technology solution, is about 5% of the equation. And processes, protocols, practice is about 15%, but the other 80% is people, to Rob's point. And so when I get set back, I say, well, what is exposure? You asked about how do we risk exposure? And there's some exposures that can be seen. It could be the wildland fire. It can be that green cloud of hazmat stuff coming right at you, and you see it and you want to back away. But some are not seen, right? And we're seeing that with the COVID-19 pandemic, where we can't see the threat. And so there's a lot of ways to reduce exposure, but what we're really trying to do is mitigate the risk to being exposed. And so in aeromedical, in aviation safety, we have something called the Swiss cheese model. And the premise is this: you have a number of slices of Swiss cheese, each of them have their own random holes, and given a certain amount of time, it will inevitably be where 10 slices of Swiss cheese, one of the holes goes all the way through. And ultimately, that's what happens when we have an exposure or risk. And in aviation crashes, if we look back in history and you look at what are all the dynamics that happened before that crash, you see that there was mitigating things that happened along this chain in a certain set of sequences that at any time they could have been broken and it would have protected them. And so when you look at that Swiss cheese model, you're like, all right, how do we put protections in place at each one of those lines to minimize the possibility of having one of those holes go all the way through? And so tools, right? Following that same aviation consistency, there's maintenance records, and there's tools that says, have you done this, this, this? Are you checking this? There's systems in place there. Man, Todd was talking about it, Tagman was talking about it. When I still am carrying everything from my home and my personal life to work, and there's a review and there's tools that ask us survey questions that we do when we come on shift or at shift change of, am I okay? Am I feeling extra stressed? Did I sleep? Do I have even a slight illness or cold or something that would add to me not performing at my optimal level? And it's not a yes or no, it's a, wow, on a scale from 1 to 10, I'm kind of a 7 today. I'm a 7 today, talking to my pilot, and they're like, well, I'm about an 8. My nurse, she's like, hey, I'm a 10. That's great, but we kind of know where each other stand. There's that fatigue, and we make poor decisions when we're tired. So we have a fatigue timeout policy that's all online, and it's a tool that we use. There's checklists, and the checklist, and you see this with pilots, every pilot out there, no matter how long they've flown and how big the commercial airlines, every time they walk through a checklist to not miss anything, and they have proper communications. And so to answer your question, you said, can technology help reduce risk exposure? I think absolutely. Technology can assist in providing situational awareness of how we're doing. It enhances visibility, awareness, locations. It could be like you guys are talking about, real-time location updates, surveillance tracking, communication platforms. But the bottom line is, the better informed, the better decision we make.
That was a great answer. Mike, I think you have something to add here.
You know, it's just as I was listening to Chris talk about the Swiss cheese model, one of the things that popped up in my mind is a quote from W. Edwards Deming, the founder of kind of quality management in the world as we know it. And he said, when you put a person up against a system or process, the system or process will win every time. So when we're talking about technology and systems and practices and processes, as leaders, we have a responsibility to design systems and processes, and Todd says this pretty regularly, that it's easier to do things the right way. It's easier to do things in a way that makes sure nobody walks into a tail rotor. It's easier to do things in a way to make sure that you're not going to run out of oxygen on this particular call. Whatever it happens to be, that the systems, practices, and processes and the technology all line up together to set the people up for success. And I know you gave an 80% responsibility to the people. The improvement science folks would say it's about 5% and 95% the system and process and technology defined. So there may be a little bit of a meeting space in there, but it's just, I think it's really helpful to think about design carefully. And particularly in technology and with scenario planning, you can have a theory of, if I design it this way, people will behave a certain way. Well, we can test it, right? You can test it in a scenario and say, you know, will this checklist result in making sure we don't miss anything? And you can try it a bunch of different times in a bunch of different scenarios that aren't real as a way to help use design to mitigate your risk. Does that make sense?
I think so. Rob, did you have something to add there too?
You just said, Mike, what I was thinking too, is you have to have the system with it as well. Chris, I'm really, you're humble. You said your technology, you only said it's only 5% of the solution. Most of the technology companies I've talked with in the space say, well, if everybody used my mapping software or my tool, then the world would all be great and everything would work out. And they don't, you know, they fail to realize that each piece of technology is but one part of this bigger picture, and having how those work together is what's more important.
Yeah, I'll mirror what to critique what Mike said, which is exactly right. You know, I was talking about change in behaviors, and just putting a solution in place doesn't fix that, right? It's 80% of human behaviors that we need to change. And Mike's absolutely right that there's a just culture out there. And by just culture, we mean, hey, if something happened and if there's an error or a potential bad outcome or a bad outcome, do we blame the human, or do we look back and say, our system didn't put the controls in place for the best potential outcome for us? And so Mike and Rob are 100% on that as well.
I like how we're exploring the adjacencies between technology, public safety, and improvement science. And frankly, that's kind of where we can craft solutions around them, be they technological or procedural. I think that's compelling. This conversation is going great, guys. So great jobs thus far. I've got a question in from the audience I'm hoping you guys could take a stab at. So what scenario planning is in place when expected underlying resources are not available? So what scenario planning is in place when expected underlying resources are not available, and how is this practiced? Todd, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I think, you know, from my experience, that's part of why the best, especially disaster planning, whether it's local or larger, involves your neighboring agencies and providers. That's why the best, especially disaster planning. Sounds like I've got a lot of echo.
No, you're good.
Okay. So the
Now you're back.
So when you're thinking about any problem that happens during a disaster, and as we've said before today, some of that is resources, and the biggest resource is people, and the ability to handle that. So that's a thing you have to plan for, but that's where you work regionally. And then I think what's harder to plan, and especially to do multiple times a year, is to plan for the very far outside resources like DMAC and you know, federal or state resources that are not available for your planning. Because like during Hurricane Katrina, for example, that was one of the areas where I think a lot of us really had it brought home to us that, you know, training with your local neighboring counties isn't really enough if they're overwhelmed too. If it's a large enough scale disaster that they have their own problems, they can't come help.
Mike, did you want to add to that?
You know, I was just thinking about a disaster that happened in my neighborhood here 3 years ago when we had mudslides after the fires. And, you know, you think about, you know, resources not being available. The cell towers got taken out. So people who were stuck at home couldn't call for help. They had to literally hike out through mudslide and all this kind of thing in order to be able to get help. And the roads were washed out. So the modes of transportation were locked up. And you know, American Medical Response, our local paramedic system, the crew that was on duty in our neighborhood went to an area and basically commandeered a church and set up a clinic and just sent people out in the area to grab people to bring them in. And for close to 50 hours, they managed diabetics and CHF patients and COPD patients and people just with kind of chronic disease in the area with no support or communications from the outside, because it was thought through like that. So when you think about scenario planning, the value of scenario planning is to think about what if this basic thing we depend on goes out, and just build that in as your practice. What if all of our communication system goes out? What if our system leaders who wrote the disaster plan are in the front car of the train that crashes? How do you think through it from that perspective?
Yeah, Pratik, Mike's jumping on that of that. What happens when something expected didn't happen? And that's what we plan for. That should be the cornerstone. We talk about airway management as three of us were in the paramedic field, and we think about not, well, what happens? How do I manage this patient's airway? It's what if what I was going to do fails? Then what's plan B? What's plan C? What's plan D? And so based on your scenario planning is, but what you should add that in of, I have all these expected resources, but what happens when they don't show up? Or what happens when I can't actually even communicate with them to let them know I need help? Or what happens if? That's best to do, not in real life, but in that preparedness and planning stage.
These are some powerful answers. So you're basically saying when scenario planning is not in place, establish it, but more importantly, it starts with asking some essential questions of human function. What do we do when this happens? What do we do when that happens? Start to document them and catalog them, and then begin to disseminate these throughout your agency so that you can develop over time a schema on what to do. I think it just starts with asking some of those essential questions. Mike?
So when you talk about kind of anticipating that, I was reminded of a visit to Israel I took a few years ago during the height of the Intifada, where there was a lot of conflict happening, and the Israelis have got more experience dealing with multiple casualty incidents than almost anybody else on the planet. And they do a couple of things. One, they train everybody from their volunteer EMT, explorer, scout level kinds of folks to their physicians, and everybody in between gets trained to be an incident commander, so they can command an incident. So everybody in the country who's an emergency responder is an incident commander. Right here in Santa Barbara, if there's a hazardous materials spill on the highway out in front of me, they have to call the hazmat team, which is there's only a handful of people who are trained to work in a level A suit in the hot zone. In Israel, every single person is trained to work in the level A suit in the hot zone. So they are the hazmat team. They don't call the hazmat team. Everybody's it. So while I was in Jerusalem, there had been a bombing 2 days earlier at a cafe with 14 dead and 117 injuries. And the first person to arrive, who was actually riding his bicycle by, he didn't necessarily get the call, but he's a 15-year-old volunteer for MATA, but he's been through the incident command training. So he pulled out his little radio and said, "I've got command." And he set up command and set up, the egress and transportation sections and this kind of thing. And one of the things the Israelis have discovered is that transfer of command does not improve the handling of the disaster. So when the commanders and the people who are senior with all the experience showed up on the scene, they didn't take command from the 15-year-old. They supported it and worked within that structure and framework. And that comes from having, trained with all this kind of stuff and critique the crap out of real experiences to know what really helps and what really doesn't help. There's a lot we can learn from other people who've got real experience in this.
That is an incredibly powerful example. Thanks for sharing that, Mike. So to our audience member, if it doesn't exist, it starts with one. You start, just like he gave the example from Israel, is start asking those questions and, talk to your leadership, talk to your command, talk to your peers, start to document them. And as you do, you are indirectly now creating a framework And at that point, I mean, you are solving the problem right there by tapping into your expertise and curiosity and marrying them to and finding that adjacency. Technology is just going to help you do it better and faster ultimately. But as the panel is saying, getting there and getting these procedures and questions right is key. Todd, did you have something to add to that? I got you on mute again, Todd.
I was earlier, and then I fixed myself, and there we go. So the you know, just really quickly, I think the thing about that is that in that disaster, you want to have pre-planned your options. You don't want to be trying to figure everything out. And so, you know, a more recent real-world example for all of us is during COVID at the beginning of this, or in places like New York and New Orleans and other places that were overwhelmed, they began thinking in advance across most of the country, what happens when we run out of ventilators? What happens when we run out of ICU beds? That is not the time to be trying to figure out the ethical and moral and health and legal issues associated with triaging. Now, I think in public safety, that's the kind of work we do every day. And to tie it all back around to the very beginning of, you know, if you're doing perfect practice on a regular basis to do your job, then doing it on a larger scale and a disaster scale becomes easier and easier, because we roll up on the scene. You know, there's maybe 2 of us in the ambulance, or 1 officer in a vehicle, or 3 or 4 firefighters, and there are, you know, 5 cars, 8 to 10 patients. We have to start to address the situation, and we know we don't have enough resources to handle it. We have to handle it as we go through it. So I think the same thing happens. It's that larger scale, and we're not winging it, because we've practiced those things, and all the way down to, you know, when I don't have anything, I got to do something. What is that? Something maybe, you know, run for the hills. I'm not sure, but you know, don't try to figure it out in the moment if you don't have to. And obviously stuff will still come up, but do your best to come up with those versions and read other people's examples and history and stories, and those things will really save the day.
That's a great synthesis. And guys in the audience, continue to keep us asking questions. We've got a ton in the queue. In the event that we don't get to them all, you know, please engage with us offline. We're going to have a contact information slide at the end, and then you can find any of the panelists that are present today on LinkedIn as well. But this next question is a natural follow-up. So let's dive a little bit back into training and kind of the feasibility of it. So our audience member here is asking, as far as training goes, how can you, as an individual agency or individual government organization, impact the amount of interagency training that takes place if you're not really in charge of planning? Does it even matter how much you train for it if that cooperation is not there? Can you guys talk to that a little bit? Todd?
I'll just jump in and echo what Mike said before, which is that if you build those relationships, and I think it was Mike that said it, if you know, even if you are a supervisor level person who doesn't have the control of those things, you have the opportunity to interact with supervisors and managers of your surrounding agencies and build those relationships at the beginning. And then you can talk about those kinds of things. And so at least when they show up on the scene, as Mike said, it's Todd or Chris or Rob or Pratik showing up. It's not, you know, some other supervisor I've never talked to before. So, you know, you have to be an influencer, and there's all kinds of leadership books about how to influence things without being the actual person and authority. And if you keep, my experience is, if you keep influencing, you keep working hard, you keep trying to do the right things, you'll ultimately end up in a leadership role where you actually have some authority to do that, or you have a pretty good shot at that. But start at the place you can go through it. You know, literally go have coffee, you know, but with somebody, go meet with them, go find out who you know, who knows them. You know, it's the local LinkedIn, right? Who knows a supervisor over in the next county? I want to talk to them. And some of them, we all go to work to do a good job. We don't go to work to suck. And so if you take the opportunity to go talk with like-minded people, and they're going to be butt heads, in your organization and in other organizations, and you sometimes have to work around them, just like you have to on scene.
I would just, add to that, if you're in a position to be able to provide food for gatherings, whatever it happens to be, it is huge. When we were planning and dealing with riots associated with the Meserly trial related to the Oscar Grant killing a few years ago in Oakland, which is likely to open back up again based on something I saw a couple of days ago in the newspaper. When we were doing the planning for that, I made the investment in pizza. And I basically had 2 pizzerias and bought 2 pizzerias out of all of their food, and I managed to figure out a way to finance it. But I fed 1,800 police officers and 200 paramedics over the course of a day and a half's worth of planning, and set it up so that everybody had to come and interact during that process. And things that, the FBI was over here and they weren't over here talking to the Oakland police folks, and through the mix of food, just like Todd suggested coffee, it is amazing the level of connection and planning and cooperation that can be developed when you share a meal with anybody.
That's got to be my favorite answer. And you also touched on the national and international agencies. I mean, a lot of people may not know this, but intelligence is a public safety function, right? If the FBI can come in and tell you about the topography of a region, that will inform your scenario plans. And I've got another question.
Pizza too.
Pizza is always the right answer.
Pizza's the right answer. Yep. So being from Chicago, I agree with that, and we think we have the best pizza. So this next question here is, again, related. Should you, practitioner of public safety, responder in a public safety agency, should you make a plan for certain types of incidents? Think floods, power outages, epidemiological response, disease outbreak. Or should you, as a responder, make a plan that should be able to cover a variety of different incident types? So the question is, should we tailor our training exercises, our scenario planning to say the top 5 or 6 most common incident types, or perhaps even all of them? Or should we do more of a generic plan that covers just any incident?
I think it's a little bit of both and. My experience is the people who focus on the generic training, they end up, fluffing over a lot of stuff and not tackling the hard situations. So instead, if you take a real incident and a real situation that happened somewhere, where you can get the videos and the plans and the after action reports and all that kind of stuff, and just bring that whole scenario into your community. So when the Air Florida plane crashed in Washington, D.C. and in the icy river, and people were alive and on the road and all that kind of craziness, bring that to Santa Barbara. And it's like, how would we deal with that exact kind of situation here? It will force us to think through things that you won't think of if you stay generic.
Got it. No, I think that's a really powerful answer. Todd, would you like to add to that as well?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think it's a lot of those things, and I think there are some common frameworks for how to think about when bad things happen. Common potential issues like resources and people with COVID, PPE, all those kind of things that are there. So I think working through any of them is smart. Being too generic is better than not doing it at all. But I think it's important to first of all, if you're doing it once a year, that's tough because you have to choose what you're going to work on. But if you're doing some variation of it, twice a year, 3 times a year, 4 times a year, that's where people come up with these tabletop exercises that don't involve a whole ton of people and resources and expense and overtime to go through that. But even like a professional athlete or just a serious athlete, visualizing what happens. walking through the scenario in their head, thinking about all that is really a form of simulation. And then doing that with somebody that you're sitting having pizza with is another form of simulation, and working your way through those things. But you know, there's nothing like learning from everybody else's mistakes. I always say I don't mind making my own mistakes. I just don't want to make the same mistakes everybody else always has.
Yeah. And I just got a text from Rob Lawrence who said also exercise the recovery as well as the response.
That's
good advice.
That's fantastic advice. I mean, everything you guys are saying is wonderful because it really speaks to just honing in on your expertise and your response muscles, so that when you are introduced to an emergency communications platform from the likes of Pulsara, or the notion of telematics and building an IoT connected emergency department from the likes of Suntech, conducting analytics on your responses from FirstWatch, or even Here Technologies launched a new scenario planning tool called Here LiDAR Data. If we give you the ability to plan out your scenario in a 3D world, and you see the topography and the geography of your city, your county, your region, you know exactly what to go through, because as the panelists said, you built that checklist of, okay, here's what we run through in a flood, here's what we run through in a fire, here's what we run through in a really big flood, in a really big fire, here are the agencies that we call. And I just love how no matter what the tool is, they all connect together, and it's built around this ecosystem, and the ecosystem really centers around you, the first responder or the emergency responder. I think that's compelling. We're getting to the final question of the discussion today, and it's a doozy, and I would love for all of you guys to weigh in on this. And that is, you've got some amazing ideas, right? Like, again, a century plus of experience in public safety, knowledge, you went to school for it. What are some of the best ways, maybe one or two, that public safety officials can share best practices? And if I'm a first responder, where can I go to learn more about what I should be doing, what I should be thinking about, what's cutting edge in my field? How can I do my job better? Can you guys touch on that a little bit? Chris?
Yeah, I'll start off, and everybody will have probably very similar answers. Is that we live in a different world today than we lived even at the beginning of this year. And yet here we are gathering around, breaking bread right now, sharing best practices. And we're not talking about all the features of Suntech and all the intricacies of Pulsara. We're not going through any of the back end surveillance QI enhancements of FirstWatch. What we're doing is we're paying it forward and sharing an opportunity to humanize people who want to share and connect and learn from each other. And like you said, it's a smaller world when you have video conferencing and when you have podcasts and webinars and blogs and articles, and you are wanting to pay it forward. And I believe, and I'm speaking for the rest of the group here, that if anybody reach out to any one of us because something connected with them via LinkedIn or email or text or phone call, I mean, Mike's getting real-time updates on text about this webinar right now. We will answer those questions, or more importantly, we will get you in front of the person who can answer those questions and help make this community even smaller.
Todd?
Yeah. I'd just say really quickly, I think that, you know, the paying it forward is important. It is a part of what you're doing, but I think that the one thing that we all also share is we're all always learning. And so I think if you're approaching your best practices sharing, this little less about, I'm going to share my best practices, and a little more about, you know, I have a lot to learn, and by communicating and talking about it, I can learn a lot, and I'll also be able to share. And I find that that is the best way of sharing, and this time has leveled the playing field, where anybody from the middle of rural America or you know, Canada or any other country can learn any of this stuff. They don't have to have budget to go to a conference, fly, take the time off, and go through it. It is beautiful. It's one of the beautiful things that's come out of this situation right now.
I think you've all nailed it. I would just say stay curious about all this stuff. There's a lot of ways to learn, and stay generous with, as you learn things, share them with other folks. That's the way we collectively build our knowledge and our capacity base so that we can do better at the next disaster.
Yeah, emergency response is truly a bipartisan issue. This is an opportunity for collaboration and coming together rather than having division.
Guys, I love that answer. Thank you so much. I think, guys, the call to action to the audience here is, if you want to learn more about public safety, just reach out to the experts and thought leaders in the field. The panel has already talked about how the private sector is here to enable and empower the public sector. So don't be afraid to reach out to us. The knowledge is free. We're here to help you. We're here to share best practices, and we're here to operate on a common charter, which is protecting against internal threats and ultimately saving lives. I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists today. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that I enjoyed our conversation immensely, and I know that our audience will as well. I would love to engage with you guys again, so expect to hear from me soon. And then for those in the audience, if you have any questions at all, please reach out to any of the individuals listed here or find any of the panelists on LinkedIn, and we'd be happy to engage with you. On behalf of Here Technologies, I'm Pratik Desai. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all.